Old Chinese, also called Archaic Chinese in older works, is the form of Chinese spoken from the beginning of written records until the 3rd century BC. The earliest examples of Chinese are divinatory inscriptions on oracle bones from the late Shang dynasty. Bronze inscriptions became plentiful during the following Zhou dynasty. The latter part of the period saw a flowering of literature, including classical works such as the Analects of Confucius, the Mencius, and the Commentary of Zuo. These works served as models for literary Chinese, which remained the written standard until the early 20th century, thus preserving the vocabulary and grammar of late Old Chinese. Old Chinese was written with an early form of Chinese characters, with each character representing a monosyllabic word. Although the script is not alphabetic, most characters were created by adapting a character for a similar-sounding word. Scholars have used the phonetic information in the script and the rhyming practice of ancient poetry to reconstruct the phonology of Old Chinese, corresponding roughly to the Western Zhou period in the early part of the first millennium BC. Although many of the finer details remain unclear, most scholars agree that Old Chinese differed from Middle Chinese in lacking retroflex and palatal obstruents but having initial consonant clusters of some sort, and in having voiceless nasals and liquids. Most recent reconstructions also describe an atonal language with consonant clusters at the end of the syllable, developing into tone distinctions in Middle Chinese. Most researchers trace the core vocabulary of Old Chinese to Sino-Tibetan, with much early borrowing from neighboring languages. During the Old Chinese period, the originally monosyllabic vocabulary was augmented with polysyllabic words formed by compounding and reduplication. Several derivational affixes have also been identified. However, the language lacked inflection, and indicated grammatical relationships using word order and grammatical particles. History: the earliest known written records of the Chinese language were found at a site near modern Nanyang identified as Yin, the last capital of the Shang dynasty, and date from about 1200 BC. These are the oracle bones, short inscriptions carved on tortoise plastrons and ox scapulae for divinatory purposes, as well as a few brief bronze inscriptions. The language written is undoubtedly an early form of Chinese, but is difficult to interpret due to the limited subject matter and high proportion of proper names. Only half of the 4,000 characters used have been identified with certainty. Little is known about the grammar of this language, but it seems much less reliant on grammatical particles than Classical Chinese. From early in the Western Zhou period, around 1000 BC, the most important recovered texts are bronze inscriptions, many of considerable length. Even longer pre-classical texts on a wide range of subjects have also been transmitted through the literary tradition. The oldest parts of the Book of Documents, the classic of poetry, and the I Ching also date from the early Zhou period, and closely resemble the bronze inscriptions in vocabulary, syntax and style. A greater proportion of this more varied vocabulary has been identified than for the oracular period. The 4 centuries preceding the unification of China in 221 BC constitute the Chinese classical period in the strict sense. There are many bronze inscriptions from this period, but they are vastly outweighed by a rich literature written in ink on bamboo and wooden strips and silk. Although these are perishable materials, and many books were destroyed in the burning of the books in the Qin dynasty, other texts have been transmitted as copies. Such works from this period as the Analects, the classic of filial piety, the Mencius and the Commentary of Zuo have been admired as models of prose style since the Han dynasty. The classical Chinese language of such works formed the basis of literary Chinese, which remained the written standard until the early 20th century. Script. At the time of the oracle bones, Old Chinese words were sesquisyllabic, consisting primarily of monosyllabic roots with occasional minor pre-syllables. Each character of the script represented a single word, and the development of these word characters follows the same 3 stages that characterized Egyptian hieroglyphic, Mesopotamian cuneiform and Mayan hieroglyphic writing. Some words could be represented by pictures such as E, Yen Ra Sun, a Ra copyright N person, and Eo Ma to the first tree, by abstract symbols such as a Permel Zar N3, and a Shao N G up, or by composite symbols such as E, Lo N Grove. About 1,000 of the oracle bone characters, nearly a quarter of the total, are of this type, though 300 of them have not yet been deciphered. Though the pictographic origins of these characters are apparent, they have already undergone extensive simplification and conventionalization. Evolved forms of most of these characters are still in common use today. In the next stage, characters of pictorial origin were borrowed to signify similar-sounding words that could not be represented pictorially, such as abstract terms and grammatical particles. An example of such a phonetic loan is a three-quarters like written with the character for a similar-sounding word meaning wheat. Sometimes the borrowed character would be modified slightly to distinguish it from the original, as with don't, a borrowing of emc mother. The final stage was disambiguation of phonetic loans by the addition of semantic indicators, yielding phonosemantic compound characters. For example, the character a paragraph originally representing jar winnowing basket was also used to write the pronoun and modal particle qa. Later the less common original word was written with a compound C registered trademark, obtained by adding the symbol C bamboo to the character. This type was already used extensively on the oracle bones, and has been the main source of new characters since then. In the Shang, a dictionary compiled in the 2nd century, 80% of the 9,000 characters are classified as phonosemantic compounds. In the light of the modern understanding of Old Chinese phonology, researchers now believe that most of the characters originally classified as semantic compounds also have a phonetic nature. These developments were already present in the oracle bone script. The characters had been extensively simplified and linearized, implying a significant period of development prior to 1200 BC. This may have involved writing on perishable materials, as suggested by the appearance on oracle bones of the character Akar records. The character is thought to depict bamboo or wooden strips tied together with leather thongs, a writing material known from later archaeological finds. Development and simplification of the script continued during the pre-classical and classical periods, with characters becoming less pictorial and more linear and regular, with rounded strokes being replaced by sharp angles. The language developed compound words, so that characters came to represent morphemes, though almost all morphemes could be used as independent words. Hundreds of morphemes of 2 or more syllables also entered the language, and were written with one phonosemantic compound character per syllable. During the Warring States period, writing became more widespread, with further simplification and variation, particularly in the eastern states. The most conservative script prevailed in the western state of Qin, which would later impose its standard on the whole of China. Phonology. The phonology of Old Chinese has been reconstructed using a variety of evidence, including the phonetic components of Chinese characters, rhyming practice in the classic of poetry and descriptions of later stages of the language, especially the Kuan, a rhyme dictionary published in 601. Although many details are still disputed, recent formulations are in substantial agreement on the core issues. For example, the Old Chinese initial consonants recognized by Li Fangqi and William Baxter are given below, with Baxter's additions given in parentheses. Various initial clusters have been proposed, especially clusters of S with other consonants, but this area remains unsettled. Most scholars posit optional medials R, J and the combination R-J as the origin of the retroflex and palatal obstruents of Middle Chinese, as well as many of its vowel contrasts. However, the palatal medial J has been challenged on a number of grounds, and a variety of different realizations for this distinction have been used in recent constructions, notably the Baxter-Sagart reconstruction that proposes parallel sets of pharyngealized and non-pharyngealized syllables. The pharyngealized onsets resisted the process of palatalization that produced the palatal consonants and iotated vowels of Middle Chinese. Reconstructions since the 1980s usually propose 6 vowels. Vowels could optionally be followed by the same coders as in Middle Chinese, a glide J or W, a nasal M, N or angstrom, or a stop P, T or K. Some scholars also allow for a lay-by-over coda K. Most scholars now believe that Old Chinese lacked the tones found in later stages of the language, but had optional post-coders E and S, which developed into the Middle Chinese rising and departing tones respectively. Vocabulary. The improved understanding of Old Chinese phonology has enabled the study of the origins of Chinese words. Most researchers trace the core vocabulary to a Sino-Tibetan ancestor language, with much early borrowing from other neighboring languages. The traditional view was that Old Chinese was an isolating language, lacking both inflection and derivation, but it has become clear that words could be formed by derivational affixation, reduplication and compounding. Most authors consider only monosyllabic roots, but Baxter and Laurent also propose disyllabic roots in which the first syllable is reduced, as in modern Khmer. Sino-Tibetan Middle Chinese and its southern neighbors Thai-Euro-Kadai, Mongol-Euro-Min and the Vietic branch of Austroasiatic have similar tone systems, syllable structure, grammatical features and lack of inflection, but these are believed to be areal features spread by diffusion rather than indicating common descent. The most widely accepted hypothesis is that Chinese belongs to the Sino-Tibetan language family, usually as a primary branch. The evidence consists of some hundreds of proposed cognate words, including such basic vocabulary as the following. Some progress has been made on the sound correspondences between Chinese and Tibeto-Burman languages, though hampered by the difficulty of reconstruction on both sides. Initial consonants generally correspond regarding place and manner of articulation, but voicing and aspiration are much less regular, and prefixal elements vary widely between languages. Some researchers believe that both these phenomena reflect lost minor syllables. Proto-Tibeto-Burman as reconstructed by Benedict and Matisoff lacks an aspiration distinction on initial stops and affricates. Aspiration in Old Chinese often corresponds to pre-initial consonants in Tibetan and Lolo Burmese, and is believed to be a Chinese innovation arising from earlier prefixes. Proto-Sino-Tibetan is reconstructed with a six-vowel system as in recent reconstructions of Old Chinese, with Tibeto-Burman distinguished by the merger of the mid-central vowel E unregistered trademark with A. The other vowels are preserved by both, with some alternation between E and I, and between O and U. Loanwords. During the Old Chinese period, Chinese civilization expanded from a compact area around the lower Hui River and middle Yellow River eastwards across the North China Plain to Shandong and then south into the valley of the Yangtze River. There are no records of the non-Chinese languages formerly spoken in those areas and subsequently displaced by the Chinese expansion. However, they are believed to have contributed to the vocabulary of Old Chinese, and may be the source of some of the many Chinese words whose origins are still unknown. Jerry Norman and Mary Tzu Lin have identified early Austroasiatic loanwords in Old Chinese, possibly from the peoples of the lower Yangtze Basin known to ancient Chinese as the Yu. For example, the early Chinese name Crow for the Yangtze was later extended to a general word for river in South China. Norman and Mary suggest that the word is cognate with Vietnamese Za Ng in Mon Krua River. Hordrickert and Stricker have proposed a number of borrowings from Meo-Euro-Yao languages. These include terms related to rice cultivation, which began in the middle Yangtze Valley, e-jaw rice seedling from Proto-Meo-Euro-Yao jaw, luon hulled rice from Proto-Meo-Euro-Yao mblaua. Other words are believed to have been borrowed from languages to the south of the Chinese area, but it is not clear which was the original source. For example, Zjaa elephant can be compared with Mon Koya, Proto-Thai Jack and Burmese Kawa. K chicken versus Proto-Thai K unregistered trademark IB Proto-Meo-Euro-Yao Kai and Proto-Vietnam Euro Maung Ka. In ancient times, the Tarim Basin was occupied by speakers of Indo-European Tocharian languages, the source of Mjit honey, from Proto-Tocharian AE unregistered trademark T, E unregistered trademark, cognate with English mead. The northern neighbors of Chinese contributed such words as Ka for Euro compare Mongolian to Poundal and Manchu Tuqan. Affixation Chinese philologists have long noted words with related meanings and similar pronunciations, sometimes written using the same character. Henri Maspero attributed some of these alternations to consonant clusters resulting from derivational affixes. Subsequent work has identified several such affixes, some of which appear to have cognates in other Sino-Tibetan languages. A common case is derivation by tone change, in which words in the departing tone appear to be derived from words in other tones. If Audricourt's theory of the origin of the departing tone is accepted, these tonal derivations can be interpreted as the result of a derivational suffix s. As Tibetan has a similar suffix, it may be inherited from Sino-Tibetan. Examples include dzjin to exhaust, and dzjins exhausted, consumed, ash, kit to tie, and kit's hair knot, nup to bring in, and nuts,